What is a Ukrainian and what is a Russian? Okay, I was asked to maybe do a video based on this topic. What is a Ukrainian? And I thought that that is a good idea for a topic, and I'd make a video, not so much to explain it, so much as to explore the question. I'm not necessarily an expert on on this topic, but I think that is the question. Uh, who are these people? You know, what what do they want? What's going on? Is it are they all the same? A Russian and a Ukrainian, and definitely in the collective sense, people have used. They say the Russians. In a lot of ways, they're thinking also Ukrainians, or they're thinking of something that doesn't exist. Either it doesn't exist anymore, or it never existed. Okay, so especially with the Russians, where you have to figure that the Russians of today are not the Russians of like the Tsar, the Russian Empire, Tolstoy, and so forth. These are all from like every great Russian writer or artist or so forth was from the old Russian nobility in the Russian Empire, and that those people are gone because the Bolshevik Revolution wiped them out. So that's no longer a Russia that's here with us, because they might say as a class they were wiped out, either killed or driven into exile, and so on and so forth. I mean, certainly a few uh, are around or in Russia still, but in general, this doesn't really exist. And that's the older, more traditional conception of Russia. And when people were looking at the Russian Empire, you know, Europeans saw it, say, just over 100 years ago, like this was like a Prussian project, a colonial project, where you have like Germanic overlords over like a Slavic population. Is how they saw it, and to some extent, you know, these people were say different. The Russian nobility, you know, people in World War I, the troops were suspicious of the generals, that they were German stock, or they had German names, or they were more loyal to Germany just on who they are, and they saw them as like different people. Like these are people who would like speak French just uh, a lot like the German nobles would, um, for a time. They would just enjoy it, you know, and seeing them, or not not even knowing Russian maybe, and that's all gone. And with Ukraine, it's a bit different, and some of those people fled to Ukraine even at the time. But it's just different. I don't want to necessarily go into a deep dive of like Ivan the Terrible and Kievan Rus and um, all that. But if we start with the German Empire or the Russian Empire, where you have Ukraine as subject of this empire, as part of this empire, but at no point was it really the same. A Ukrainian was something different. People go very far. I mean, you know, we'll ask the question, what is a Russian? And you know, Russians will say pretty much it's the same thing. A Ukrainian is a Russian, or maybe it's the conception of Ukraine as it is like an anti-Russia, or these are people who are Russians but have learned to hate Russia and are. I mean, is there any truth to that? Certainly, there are. I mean, significant amounts of Ukrainians speak Russian. Even at the beginning of the war, they say most of the Azov regiment is Russian speaking, and certainly a lot of the nation of Ukraine, where the borders are. I mean, people could argue back and forth over who's say the Crimea really belongs to. Um, this is arguable. I mean, in the sense of like the historical who's been there. But I mean, now it's not really. It's no longer arguable in the sense that people have agreed to these borders, including Russia. And but the question is, you know, is this a pointless? Are we, you know, just we created a proxy that, you know, we're going to fight to the last Ukrainian, and these people don't want to fight, but Zelensky is forcing them to, because he hates Russia, and they'll say, and so on and so forth. Um, every Ukrainian I've ever met, so going back before this started, would kind of drive people crazy with their own nationalist obsession. You know, their own national, because Ukrainians tend to be really into Ukraine, and where they'll go on about it. And you know, in the past, people would say not so much care. You know, you who cares about Ukraine? I mean, it's like like there's a Jerry Seinfeld bit with the Ukrainian guy who's really into Ukraine, and but I've met people say in the military or in like there's a lot of like Russian communities, say like West Hollywood or so forth, where there's actually a lot of Ukrainians there, but Ukrainians will be real into Ukraine, and that had been known before. Like this is like an anti-communist people, because they'd be they're against the Soviet Union, and say so we're like Israel might had a similar thing with like getting the Jews out of the Soviet Union, because you know they were considered like an anti communist people, the same as the Ukrainians. I know just from like when kind of the internet first started, or and I would first start going on it, there you would find a lot of literature that would be like a lot of the right wing literature would, not literature but on online, but also literature. But you'd find the stuff that would be related to Ukraine in the sense of like Holodomor, where they're like starving the Russian communists were like starving out the the Ukrainians. And maybe some of the stuff would emphasize that the communists were say Jewish commissars or something, but it's this is where you would hear about this stuff like the Holodomor, like the crimes of communists and so forth. But Ukrainian maybe might see this differently, as Russia is inherently to blame, because at the end of World War One, Germany basically effectively created a bunch of countries out of the Russians lost World War One, and they signed a peace treaty where they the Bolsheviks signed with Lenin and Trotsky, where they gave up quite a bit. They gave up a lot of say European countries, Baltic states, and so forth, and because a lot of the stuff used to be under the Russian Empire, like Finland or so on and so forth. But Ukraine was one of them. So Ukraine was briefly its own thing, and there was a certain time where they had a German occupation, say in Kiev at the end of World War One, and this lasted until the Russians invaded Ukraine and so on and so forth. Along with they would invade Poland as well, and so I mean this stuff happens. Russia invades, and so they invaded Ukraine, and they imposed the Bolshevik, the communist rule over Ukraine. And so, and then they purposely starve out a hipload of people. But you could figure why Ukrainians don't want to live under Russia again. You just after that alone. But figure there's other things to it, like even you know, the Russians are trying to get rid of these people. The Bolsheviks were trying to get rid of these people through famine and things. And even if you argue that, say, there's hardcore Stalinists out there who will say that it was an accident, it was an accidental famine. I mean, you might still not want to be governed by the people who were in power when these accidents were happening. If you I mean, I find that understandable. But I mean, basically, the Ukrainians, I would say, they're willing to fight, and this is in a way, it's not we're fighting for the last Ukrainian, and the Ukrainians are fighting for their lives right now. If we weren't using them as a proxy, they would just be getting killed or being enslaved by Russians who, I mean, a lot of stuff has gotten confused by ideology, where you're looking at the Soviet Union as one thing, but you might figure that everything they're doing is because of their communist ideology, and it's separate from who they are as Russians. And that's, I mean, was never true for a minute. A lot of the character of the Soviet brutality was, you know, you can't just say it's they read Karl Marx and then got worked up and then became like these brutal people. You know, they have certain motivations and things in their own bigotries and prejudices and so forth in their national character. You know, they have predilections for certain behaviors, and you can't just say it's communist, or it's not even the Russians who did it. It was only Jewish commissars I mean, this is what people say, and that's I mean, that's a lot to dive into as well. But in a lot of ways, Russians were in control, and beyond that, it would be strange that they just got randomly taken over by uh, people who have nothing to do with what they're all about. In a lot of ways, Russians will use people as executioners to kind of take the blame off themselves, and like Lithuanians and so forth. The So a lot of what you think of with Russia and with communists is you have to start to kind of parse this out and which is which, but a lot of it is the same, or they meet. I mean, there's a certain reason why they took to this ideology. There's a certain predisposition to why they adopted this and overthrew their old, uh, the old ruling class, and then they installed a Bolshevik regime, the communist regime, and the Soviets were a bit different in character than even other communists, but these all have a certain national character in them in how they behave. Uh, to to a certain degree, a lot of I mean, I remember when I was a kid, when you'd be really into movies where Russians were the bad guys, say like Hollywood action movies, and so you would think, oh, the Russian communists, the Soviet, and we would call people, you Russian commie or so, but this is in the 90s, and and people, as kids, people would say, well, sometimes people would say, actually Russia's not communist anymore. Um, the Soviet Union fell, and I mean, I was small when that happened and didn't really realize it, because you know more from watching the movies and things, but in some way, looking back, maybe that's not true. Maybe people jump the gun and they say they're not communist anymore because they very much still identify with the Soviet Union, and they fly these flags and use all the symbols and the language of it, and just because of the nature of their revolution is like Haiti, or something where you can't go back. Is the Russian Revolution had like a extermination type character to it, where it can't go back. The Russians now, you have to wonder who they are. I mean, like in the movies, the Russians in the movies, people would think are like very huge dudes, where they're over 6 foot tall and they're like like blonde and super tough, and that I mean that's because the actors they have play Russians were Germans and or stuff like that. Real Russians. If you pick up a AK and you put it to your shoulder, the stock is shorter than a M16, and it's because Russian soldiers are a little bit smaller. Americans are I mean, we have it all wrong. Like where we're thinking that these people are super hard. I mean, going into this war, maybe who knows? Maybe they were, but they haven't fought in that many wars to really prove themselves since World War II, and a lot of the World War II hitting power of Russia, the Soviet Union, was Ukrainian, and by 1944, 40% of the Soviet troops were Ukrainian, and that's when the Soviet army started to really tear up the Germans. It is when they had like a huge amount of Ukrainians joining up, and a lot of this is due to the Germans ultimately failing to maybe come to the correct conclusions on what is a Ukrainian, what is a Russian, because they figured too that these are all the same. It's all pretty much one thing, and their view started to evolve a a bit just from experience. If you read accounts of the Germans and things, where where they first go into the Soviet Union, when they invade, and the Ukrainians are greeting them like liberator, like they're bringing freedom. These seem to be, they have crosses painted on the vehicles, so they figure these are Christian. Um, unlike the communists, um, so they're happy to see the Germans, and the Germans don't behave like liberators because their ultimate um, their ultimate goals were basically the subjugation of the territory and to take it for themselves more or less, and to dispossess the natives of the Soviet Union, and it's for Lebensraum. And even though they collaborate a bunch, I mean they drove however many Ukrainians to fight against them, which what could be you'd consider that a major miscalculation, where at one point they said they could raise up armies of Ukrainians to fight the Russians. They figured they didn't, we don't need them, we don't want to offer them weapons and so forth. The World War II was effectively fought because of Ukraine. I mean, it was fought over Ukraine, where the Germans were looking towards that exact spot for Lebensraum, their living space, where they were going to colonize this area, and they could see the resources to why you'd want the spot. It's not so much that uh, you know Joe Biden is so into he has to cover up his scandals or so in Ukraine, so he has to win the war for shady business deal. I mean, there's a lot of resources in Ukraine, and that controlling this land isn't insignificant. It's not the Operation Barbarossa was, a lot of it was launched partially and in part because of the Crimea as well, because the Germans were very worried that the Russians could bomb their oil fields in Romania from the Crimean Peninsula. So uh, this still represents like a threat today, and who's going to possess that? Whether it be Europe or Russia, it's strategically significant. I mean, after the war, there was a guy named Francis Parker Yockey who wrote a book called Imperium. And it was basically his view of how how Europe could be could be like an empire on its own without America or without Russia, and he's looking at he said Europe would have to conquer. It would have to take the Ukraine and the Caucasus oil fields in southern Russia. But a good part of it was the breadbasket of Ukraine. The idea that this is such a vast granary, and just you could just max out with agriculture with this land. And right now, I mean, there's however much part of the world who's eating Ukrainian grain. This goes out all over. That's why there's a big grain deal, which maybe the the bridge just exploded. I mentioned that on Saturday, and it exploded on Sunday, so that was awesome. But and hopefully it blows up even more. But now the Russians might pull out of the grain deal that they cut with Turkey and so forth to get this grain out of Ukraine, because it's however much part of the world is depending on eating this stuff. It's going all over. Okay, like Ukraine. That's the problem with Europe. People say it's not dependent on itself. It can't be its own thing. It has to extend so far out somewhere without you know, colonialism or as part of globalism, or it'd have to extend to a certain point. You'd have to, I mean, where you define the boundaries with, say, Eurasia, I don't know. I know that after 1944, German troops did say that the Russians were fighting more in a more European style. The Russians who would invade Europe and would take down Germany, they had a more European style to the way they fought. I mean, it could be something to them. Certainly, for the Ukrainian view is to get out from under Russia, get out from under the yoke, say, of Russia, and link up with Europe. They'd say, it's a European nation. It's not necessarily in the Russian sphere of influence. And I mean, this might be something that people, they have certain certain views already that they don't want to revisit, where they say, well, Ukraine is part of the Russian sphere of influence, so what can you do? Give it to them. But it doesn't need to be forever. I mean, this could be a great opportunity to really take this for Europe away from Russia for good. Incorporate it. It's a valuable piece of property. Like I say, this was the Germans said that they would turn the Crimea into their Riviera, and they would write stuff like in Joseph Goebbels' diaries and stuff. He'd write about the granaries, the vast granaries, and what it'll mean to Germany to possess the stuff. It wasn't just some dumb thing why they were pushing into this territory. And once they were on this territory, they did find it friendly to them, in a way that they didn't expect, where they planned to they wanted to just kind of be the conquerors and just push people around. But as they had more difficulty, the people there were more than willing to link up, and they did collaborate to a heavy extent. Like Ukrainians were involved in a big way in say the Holocaust and so forth, like where they were like Travniki men at the Operation Reinhard camps and so on and so forth. And even then, actually, people would speak of Ukrainians, but people would note that who they referred to as Ukrainians actually could be a big grab bag of different people, including Russians and so forth, but they'd be collectively referred to as Ukrainians. So it gets confusing. But I think this can be parsed out. You can kind of figure to a certain extent, like what kind of this stuff can mean. I think definitely looking at the reality of what Russia is helpful, because it's not as strong as people thought. Just especially on its own. I mean, you say what is a Russian? You know, how Russian is a Russian, and how Russian is the Russian Federation even? You know, who are these people? But I mean, a lot of the people in the Russian Federation, we're talking about Eurasia. There's no question that this is not Europe anymore. It's something way different, and by all means, according to the Russians themselves, you know, they're definitely, just as much as the Ukrainians are pro-Western, they're anti-Western, and they don't view themselves as European or what, you know, they view themselves as something different. Even, you know, where it's other circumstance, they might say it doesn't matter. You know, who cares who's control of what? It's all the same, but they're very much see themselves as something different. In all the Russian propaganda and what they're saying, it's anti the West. And however much language, I mean, it's not even so much that they've adopted anti-Western language, because they're the originators of however much of it. And even under the Soviet Union, a lot of the leftist thought on how bad the West is and how evil the CIA or NATO is, and a lot of things that people have adopted are Russian. You know, it's what Russia said, and people respond to Russia in a certain way. Russians have always accused America of being a racist country and so forth, even when they're actively committing genocide. And it has set the tone in our country in politics in ways people maybe wouldn't have really thought, until you kind of examine like how much some of the stuff has impacted U.S. politics, bouncing back with, say, so-called superpower. However much, I mean, a lot of people did figure this out, that the Soviet Union was never that powerful, and that it was always kind of broken and busted up since World War II, and we'd overestimated it by a lot. But however many people wanted to overestimate it on both sides, and so now we're kind of busting some of the myths of Russia. We can see what they can and can't do. Now when people kind of bluster about how tough Russians are, it's it falls a little flat, because you see how they perform, and you see our Ukrainians perform, and they're doing great. And I'll take I'll take our Ukrainians over these guys. But in general, I would say that they're way different, and I mean, it's definitely something to examine. And because, say, when you pick an ally, like, you have to figure, what are these people really about? You know, do they even like us? And this is a case where they do like us, and not just because we're giving them weapons, but they seem to, they say we're Western, we want to be a part of this world. Now is kind of their big chance. The war is finally giving them the spotlight with them, their grievances, long-standing issues, and opportunity to kind of resolve this. And so, yeah, they're not going to. It'd be very cowardly now for them to not fight. Whereas it's the golden opportunity where they have all these weapons and so forth, where they really stand a chance against this much larger um, like federation of nations. Because most of the Russian Federation is not Russian, and if there is a Russian nationalism, Putin is very much against any kind of nationalism, including Russian, because it would mean like giving up how all this other territory so forth for like a Russian all Russian nation or something. Russia's very it's only a small part of what they're really governing. So in the sense, Ukraine does it tip the scales, if, for the weapons we're giving? So it looks like maybe it can. It looks like probably it will. Definitely, if we keep it up, it will. It might need to step it up. I mean, there's questions of what is a Ukrainian? Can they fly F-16 and so forth? I mean, it looks like it's time to step it up where we can. Where it's not like the Afghan army where they're never too into what they're doing. Like they never really care. Ukrainians are all about it. So is it the anti-Russia, or I mean, definitely. I'm not trying to define the Ukrainian ethnicity or something. They like Ukrainians can do that, but like we need to be familiar with like what we're who we're dealing with. But and it is so much like war is where you prove who you are. And so if you're willing to run at 10 columns and with the javelin and take these guys out, hey, that's when hey, maybe that's a great ally. Maybe these guys can really fight, and it's not a big waste of money to put these weapons in these guys' hands, and they could deal with it. They're not trying to sell it on the black market or money launder. Like they actually want to fight. Like it's not like they're all the same and no more brother wars, and they NATO's created a fake conflict just to kill people for no reason, or this is an endless war, and these people with their petty, unresolvable grievances. There's a real chance here to resolve all this stuff. It's just a matter of taking back the territory. It will get messy when the further you go east, because the Russians haven't really gotten out of this territory that's filled with like the Donbass region. I mean, they brag about blowing apart that town, Bakhmut, and they brag that like they just like level the place and just kill everybody. But that's in that's in the Donbass. That's that's the people who they're saying that they're liberating, and they just look at any picture of how that city looks now. Because the Russians just wiped everything out and just dance all over the ashes and ruins, everything. So, but I mean, they're in this region, and so they need to get shoved out with however many ethnic Russians. And So how many of these people are going to bail with Russia? If you want to live in Russia, you go to Russia. You know, this is going to be a thing where they're going to, like any separatist, they're going to have to really deal with, or else, yeah, this you can drag this out for however long if you want to turn this into an ethnic thing. But when you have like I mean, right now the war is a matter of like heavy artillery and tanks and so forth. So it'll these problems will sort themselves out just as the war goes. But as far as that goes, yeah, I think Ukraine represents a great opportunity for the United States as an ally. It's the pro-Western people. They're people who are willing to fight, and their country is not meaningless. Like if say NATO were to not let in Ukraine, and then Ukraine would become like there's like this ally of the U.S., like a Spartan kind of outpost, like a militarized frontier kind of country. That, I mean, that wouldn't necessarily be bad for the United States, because then we would have like this ally, uh, just in this great spot, this great piece of property, with all of our weapons and everything, and we could always just cut a separate deal and have our own separate. I mean, this could be our next greatest ally. Um, but definitely, just for everybody, it would be better to just fit it in the NATO framework. Um, Certainly after the war is resolved. Um, so I mean, I'm just kind of trying to dig into this question, not necessarily trying to uh, simplify the issues or something and give a history lesson. It's definitely like what we're talking about, like what is the difference of these people. I mean, you could go back to like Novgorod and Kievan Rus and stuff, but I mean, we'll just stick to that for now. I think it's it's not like, I don't think it's bad to ask who can fight better, or who, this is a matter of national security. You need to, when you're picking your allies and you're getting to know people, you need to figure out, like, you can't just figure this is all the same. Or I mean, if it was all the same, yeah, maybe we would be wasting our time. And I mean, shame on us if we were just starting a fight for no reason. But as it is, this is it, this fight's been a long time coming, and I think we've jumped on the right side of it. I think we have people who I mean, it looks like they're hitters. Like I say, everything, Russians can brag about how they did in World War II, but that was the Ukrainians were doing a lot of that. The Ukrainians can say just as much. Some of that maybe you see it gets conflated, but now we definitely see where the two sides are fighting. Definitely don't believe anything where the Russians. It's become a big thing where Russians will act like they've got this KD ratio going on where I mean, it's they would say the same thing in World War II, where the Russians would always say that for like Russian soldiers would kill like 50 like German troops and whatnot, and it would, I mean, by and large it was like the opposite was the case. So I mean, stuff like that. I don't want to just start getting into the numbers on the stuff, because who could say? But I think these are good. It's just a good question to ask, especially as we go forward, like, you get more information, and I mean, different things can maybe reveal themselves to us in different ways. It's always good to be able to learn something, just as the situation evolves, and so forth. But yeah, that's about it for you know what is a Ukrainian, what is a Russian. So all right.